Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the stream. Um, as you guys can see, we're still doing a little bit of migration this morning. So I had some interesting issues trying to do some updates that set me behind. But I figured let's get the Angular stuff upgraded. Um, and we'll get the project upgraded, and then we'll dive into things. While this is running in the background, last week we discovered that there was some stuff in our custom controls that we could bind to. Specifically, we were getting errors and invalid. Um, yeah, we'll go ahead and install that. And turns out that yeah, there is a form control UI. Um, so there is an interface that we can extend that should give us some information. So one of the things I want to do right off the bat is take that form control that we created at the end of last stream, the text input control, and let's see if we can get the form control UI interface on it. Should be fairly simple, and then it should give us more insight into what it can receive. And we may not need to specifically call out the errors and stuff like that. So I want to take a look at that really quick. But let's make sure that we get everything upgraded. Daisy UI did upgrade. Zod upgraded. We're gonna leave Playwright. We'll grab the node types. And we'll grab a lot of this stuff. I'm not going to worry about ESLint or JS DOM, and we're definitely not upgrading Node. So we'll go ahead and just grab a few things. Hey, Ole, welcome to the stream, man. It's good to have you here. So we're for sure grabbing Zod. We don't need that. We can grab these. I mean, we can grab this, right? I mean, it's just types. Playwright? No, it's not. That would be types. TypeScript ESLint, that'll be fine. Daisy. Yeah, we're not going to touch zone at all. We don't even need zone, so I'm not going to upgrade it. We don't even have it in our project. So we're definitely not going to upgrade that. Once this is done, perfect. We'll just go ahead and grab these. I'm being lazy today. I'm going to see how long AI will last until it tells me, hey, you're out of messages. So right now, I'm just having AI generate my commit messages. They're going to look a little bit better than my general commit messages. But yeah. All right, so we've upgraded everything. So let's go ahead and serve and just make sure that everything works and I haven't broken anything. If we've broken anything, we'll take care of it. But I do want to say that we implement the form UI control on our custom controls and see if that gives us the ability to remove like errors and disabled and stuff like that, but it still will work. Wait. So we're getting a warning in our to-do.ts that we're not using the Zod error pipe. That is true. We aren't using it anymore because we moved that Zod error pipe into the custom control. So we'll clean this up too. Let's take a look. So it looks like, there we go. It looks like everything's running as expected. No errors. We can see that as we change stuff here, it's changing up there. If we put in ABC, we get errors here. Let's make sure that, hey, look, we're getting our proper errors here still from our custom control. And it's cleaning stuff up. Our other custom control is working. So these are both working properly, and we are getting errors here, but interesting. So we do have a problem with our, this should be showing up as an error class. So we do have something to fix in our custom control, so we'll get that taken care of. But our error messages are working. So that all looks good. We'll get the custom control working. We aren't getting any errors. We are getting some warnings because our track by is causing it's causing a full reiteration, and that's because we're tracking the actual error messages themselves, and Angular's regenerating those based on the Zod stuff. I'm not too concerned because there's only 2 error messages that we're generating. It's not like we're going to generate 50, so our performance isn't going to degrade too much. Hey, Michael, it's good to have you here, man. Good to see you. Anyway, let's get a couple of things fixed. The first thing I do want to take a look at, and this one was shared by. We're going to take a look. So this one was shared by Matthew Riegler from the Angular team. So I can pull this over really quick. So he answered on LinkedIn and just said, yeah, that's part of the signal forms of magic. And form value control extends form UI control. So let's see if we can get this form UI control to work within our code without having to specifically add this stuff to it. So let's get WebStorm going. Yeah, I'm curious. Like, there's a bunch of things I want to see how we can do them. I can't wait for signal forms to happen. It's just they're too good, and the amount of work they're saving. So this is the feedback from the last. We did such a good job that the only thing that the Gemini Code Assist had in our feedback was, hey, you left some commented out code. Better highlights. So yeah. Here we go. So we can see that these app inputs are the ones we're using. And they come from our input.ts. So we're using invalid and errors. I'd like to make these not required, but if I comment them out, they're not going to show, right? So form value control does extend form UI control. So we implement form value control, but we aren't extend. I think extends has to come first, right? Is that one going to work? No. I think if you want to have reusable form control, just pass control as the input. No need to have implement. That's from the Manfred article. So export the class UI input text control equals input required. Fascinating. So you're saying that instead of doing this, instead of doing the form value control, what we could do is we don't have to implement this. We can instead go with control equals input dot required. And here you do form UI control. Is it? So if we take a look here, form UI control comes from Angular form signals. So here we could say form UI, there it is right there, form UI control. I've got it wrong. There we go. So that inputs the form. So you only need to import control and field from Angular form signals. I was using field. Do you have that? Do you have that link to Manfred's article? Because this becomes a control, right? Input signal, a form UI control. But we could actually just make this a control. Does that not work? Requires one type argument. So we could say that it's a string control. It has to be a string control. And here, instead of doing the ng model binding like we were doing, now we can just pass our control. And we also need to import control here, because that will give the binding. Is that not working? There's the article. Okay. Let's grab this article and let's work through this, because this was something I wanted to take a look at. And I have seen the Manfred article. Sure, send me cookies. So, so we've got a field def for this. Control equals field. So we've got this component, we've got the field def, entity, our dynamic form app field group this. So we've got our schema here, to schema, that's all validation stuff. Sounds like I got a message. Just a second. Oh, we got an image here. Okay, so you're binding to the control there, disabled. Oh. Okay, so you're using input.required field, string, or undefined, or null. Interesting. Hey, I heard the yo alternate. Thank you for the subscription, man. Thank you very much for that. So what we're looking at is a field, and I'm not seeing that in this. So we got the field def, we've got a schema, and then we're importing component and input, and we're importing control and field state here for field def of meta info. Let field, and so we're using any here. So we're grabbing the dynamic form field def name. Oh. So our dynamic form, they're saying to do basically a factory function that creates the form. Fascinating here. Then we're just going through the various things, form arrays. We'll probably be digging into this, subforms. custom fields. So yeah. So what we're seeing, and let me bring this over. This is from Johanderson. Let me make this a little bit bigger so that we can all see it. This is from Johanderson. And what he's doing is he's importing the controls here, the control here, and we're using the control, pointing it to control. He's using let in the template to set the control, which is something we might do. But then down here in the UI input text, he's setting the required, and this is a field. So we'll go ahead and pass in that field also. So let's pass in that field. And then we'll bring that in. Oh, that's from Ole. Sorry, I misattributed that one. Sorry, Ole. That's definitely from you. Yeah, I swear I've done it too. Totally, right? So here, what we're using is field. And field of string or undefined or null. So now we need to import field because that's what's going to give us our field state. Oh, come on. I think field is going to come from here. Is that not? If I look at this, yeah, field is coming from Angular signal forms. Or Angular form signals. I'm not getting field. I may be on a newer version. What if I do field state? And instead of field, we do field state. So there we go. Now it doesn't like this because field state is not assignable to type. Field state any string or number. What am I doing wrong here? Let me take a look really quick. So you're using field. But field doesn't exist anymore. Like I can't import field. Oh, now it exists. Never mind. Yeah, has no exported member field. But if I try to do control string here, and I just upgraded Angular before the stream, but now it doesn't like control because Control string is not assignable to type function fields. Oh, we need a function that gives a field state. What does that link give us? Oh, that's just to bind to control value acceptor. Okay, or accessor. Because I can no longer bind to field. Field just doesn't exist on Angular form signals. And we've got field state, field path. Is field path potentially what we're looking for? Field context? That's not what I wanted. Child field context. Item field, maybe field path. Oh, so we're using optionals here. Fascinating. Michael said control became field. Maybe version because if you were the nightly, control became field. I'm not on the nightly. I'm on the, wait, why does that binding work now? No, that binding doesn't work. I'm on version 21.0.0.next. So the leave animations, CSS, prevent early exit. So there's nothing referencing this. Fixed signal input getter behavior. So I was on 21 next 6. So element ref new input while decorates access old input. So that's the decorator stuff. Optional keys for key value pipe. Recover template literals with broken expressions. Elements. Yeah, I'm not seeing why field shouldn't be there. And if I look at what Ola shared, so the input is a field of string or undefined or null. And you're just binding to that field. I don't know why field is not there. That's the missing piece here. And if we go take a look at the article you shared, so when they were binding, it created the schema, and then here, the meta info is a function that returns field state unknown. I wonder if this will work for me also. So here, if instead of doing a control here, we do field state, and we import that, and then we make it a function that returns, or actually, no, this is a function that returns field state unknown. Boom. So that now works here. If we go take a look at our to-do, so our app inputs is still working because it's a form script. Form description is a function that returns a form. Okay. So we made it around that. I don't know where field, why I don't have access to field. But we were able to get around it. So yeah, we could have tried any. I really wanted to avoid any, but the control was telling us what it needed. And the other thing I'm curious about is if we extends form UI control string here, right? No, we don't want to create that. That needs to come in. My imports are a little bit messed up for whatever reason, but that's okay. We can add them here. Form UI control. Boom. And oh yeah, we can implement. So now we're implementing this form, which means that we can add invalid and errors. We can grab the validation error. So there's our form UI control. So that should clean that up. One thing, let's do the same that poll I was doing, and let's do a let control equal control. This is just going to pull the signal out. name collision. So now we can just say that this is the UI control. Boom, that works. Wait, oh, there's no function on this now. And the other thing that I'm curious about is if I just do UI control.invalid, that doesn't work. So we still need invalid. We still need errors. We still need the Zod error stuff there. But I'm very curious about, does this work? So there's no complaint. Oh, there is a complaint here. Well, that's the Zod error pipe. We no longer have the Zod error pipe, so let's get rid of that. Clean that all up. Let's make sure we're compiling. So we'll go ahead and reserve this and just make sure it's compiling. Field was renamed to field tree. Oh. Okay. Thank you for looking that up, Michael. I'm curious if what we're doing works, and then we'll replace it with field tree. So here we go. We've got our form. We've got no errors right now. These should all work just fine, and we should see that they're updating. The ones that I'm curious about. Okay, so that is broken. We're broken right now. So definitely broken here. So what I did didn't work. So instead of that, we're going to take input.required, and this should be a field tree. We'll bring that in and field tree string, because we know it's going to be a string. That should fix all of that up. We should compile. If we refresh, we're not getting our errors anymore. So that is working. So the binding is working. But what we're not getting is the validation stuff. The validation is no longer being applied to our form control. I mean, we can take this off. Let's just make sure it rebuilds everything for us. Fascinating. Oh, never mind. I expect this to happen. I was confused because I thought it was giving me 2 prompts. Okay, so it rebuilds. So we're not getting the errors. Let's make sure that the errors actually exist. So let's go back to our to-dos. And we can add another pre up here. And here we can say, hey, we want model dot name dot there should be errors on this, right? Model dot name dot or form dot name dot errors. Or actually, we can probably just grab error form dot errors. Let's grab the error summary and see what's on that. Object. Oh, that's useful. So we do have two errors. We do know that. We could do form.error summary.map.error and error.message to JSON. And actually, we don't need the pipe here. What doesn't it like? You know what? Throwing that JSON pipe on there is going to work just fine. That's what I should have done anyway, instead of trying to do the. Yeah, so we can see that as soon as we wipe this out, we're getting a too small error with a message. And then please provide a name with it. Oh. The issue here is that the message used to be inside of the issue. They fixed that bug. And yeah, field tree works. The issue here is that we no longer need this Zod error anymore. Now we can just grab error.message. And everything should be back to the way it was before. So they fixed another bug. Wait, no, that doesn't make sense. Oh, it's still inside of issue. Never mind. That does make sense. That doesn't make sense. Error. So this is still a Zod error. It's still inside of the issue. We're not getting errors. And one of the things we could do is we can add a constructor here. And inside of our constructor, we could say effect. And on our effect here, let's grab that from signals. So for our effect, we can say errors, we could say const errors. Well, actually, we don't even need that. We could just console .log errors, and then we could just do this .errors. And so that is going to log every time we get errors. And so let's take a look here. So if we refresh this and we wipe this out, so we do have an error here. Our path is name. Should it be control.errors? We could take a look at control.errors. We can grab that. See, control doesn't have yeah, we can totally log control. So the other thing we can do is, because we're not getting errors, we can also console.log control, this.control. Let's see what we're getting, right? Okay, so our control is that as soon as we wipe that out, our control didn't change. And we can verify this by deleting that, and boom, nothing changed. So our control our errors are still coming in as undefined. Field errors. So the field so the dynamic form Hi. What? Yeah, I am right now. Yeah. My wife was checking to make sure I'm streaming. No, you're fine. Totally fine. Thank you. No, I was just trying to figure something out. Because you're not passing errors as model input, so it looks like we need to get errors from control directly, maybe. So we had some magic that was happening before with the so where we were before, and we can take a look at like what's changed, right? If we go take a look at Get Kraken, and here, if we take a look at our input, right? Before, when we were using ng model and we were implementing form value control, we weren't actually binding invalid and errors. That was being done for us. So we can see here the app input, we don't have any of that stuff being bound. Now we're passing that input straight in. The reason the effect isn't logging again is because we can do this dot control dot dot errors here, and we're going to need to target this as any, which is not fun. But let's see what happens in this case. This dot control dot errors is not a function. This isn't going to work because the first time it binds through, it's so we'll see. Maybe it works. I don't know. Oh, we're using proxies. Fascinating. 50% off any pro plan. I don't want advertising in my. So errors probably exists. So this is kind of ugly, but we can do $any, and we can do control or UI control, right? UI control. And actually, there we go. So this is getting a little bit ugly. Let's follow the convention that they're using. So here we can name this control, and here we're going to rename this to be field. And this can be control. And here we're going to go to control. And here we're going to go to control. And then down here, we're going to say this is field. We can take out this entire constructor here. So that should be fine. And now let's take a look at the host must be a native form control such as input, select, or text area with a custom form control component with a value or check model. What did I do? Do I need to rebuild this? That might be my problem. Let's serve this again. Let's go ahead and serve this again. Let control equals this dot control. Do I have to do this dot control? Required input field from, oh, must be, yes. So you're saying this dot control works, huh? That does work. That absolutely works. And that fixes it up. I had my binding all messed up. And that's what that error was saying. Control errors is not a function. It's saying control.errors is not a function. Is it not a function? Let's see what happens if I take the function call off. Still nothing. Okay, control.errors. Isn't that going to okay. I thought it would grab from here, but I guess because it's a factory, we need to grab from it. That's why. This is a factory. That explains a lot. And unfortunately, this isn't going to work. Oh, it is. Never mind. So I should be able to do control.invalid here also. And that fixes the other issue. So now we can see that we're getting the error on the form control, and it's going away once it's fixed. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's also get rid of the pre stuff that we were doing here to add the errors. So let's regroup and see what we've done. So the first thing we can do is get rid of this stuff. I don't think we need invalid or errors anymore because we're not using them, which means we can also get rid of the validation errors there. The other thing we could do is we could say at let UI control, or yeah, we could call it our form control equal this dot, or not equals control, because it's going to grab from the factory. And then here we could just say this is our form control. And we don't need the function call anymore. And here we can also say form control. And we don't need the function call anymore. And the reason that we need this function call is if we look at what this dot control actually turns into, it turns into a factory that returns a field state. So to get that field state out, and form control is probably the wrong thing to call it. Let's rename this to field state. And so that's going to give us better insight. I'm trying to decide which is better. Is it less confusing to have to call control as a function? And maybe. Let's stop confusing things for right now. So thanks for pointing that out, Ole. The reason, and this was a piece that just wasn't sticking for me as I was trying to work through this. This is a factory function. So this binding that we're using here with the field tree of type string, we're saying, hey, this is required. These, well, and we could, right now we're doing string, but we could go here and here. Does that still work? Yeah. So it's still working, and just to verify that it's working, one thing we can do is we can kill our and rebuild from scratch here just to make sure that nothing's cached. Yeah, that's a good call out, Ola. And this is where it might get a little bit confusing. But so yeah, so we can make that a generic on our input type. And things seem to work out just fine. So we can see that everything is working based on our stuff from Zod, but our signal forms are good. We're not throwing any errors. But Ole is making a good point here. And this is going to look really weird, but because field tree of type T, you know what? While it works, we're going to go back and we're going to call this a string on purpose. And if you guys want to make it generic, we've proven that you can genericize your inputs and add generic fields here, and it'll work just fine. The reason that I want to go here is that the type of field tree, if we look, field tree is a function that returns a field state and a value. So that's what this type stuff is saying here. We've got our field state, but it is a function. So it is a factory function. We can look at it that way. And then we've got maybe field tree. So this is where we're getting into like monads and stuff like that, and optionals from functional programming, these maybes. Which are something that I'm a really big fan of, so I'm really happy to see this. But I'm intentionally going back to not genericizing this because I want this to show up here to remind us, that we're using a factory function. And in fact, if we comment this out, so that it doesn't work anymore, right? Now we have to go control here. And then this gets really ugly because, and this is what Ole is talking about. Notice now that we've got our signal, so we're unwrapping our signal here and here. But then we're calling the function factory that this signal returns, right? So we can see it's a function that returns a field tree of type string. And maybe if we put this back, we could see it again. Let's see what happens if we turn this back into a generic. So now if we look at control, yeah. So it is a function that returns a field tree of type T. And so we can see this first call here, and then the second call, it gets ugly. It gets very, very ugly. And the reason for this ugliness comes down to the fact that we're using a factory function. So if we put this back, now this is a field tree of type T. Now we can take that out, and we can take that out, and we can take that out. And here we can see control is an input signal. It's not that good. Let's go back to string here. We'll just pull out our generic. We don't need the generic here. And so now we can see that this dot control returns a field tree, but it gives us better information. Control is a field tree, but WebStorm is showing us the field tree is actually a factory that returns a field state. And so for us to get the field state that we need to get the invalid or the errors or stuff like that, we need to call that factory function. And this is where I'm not sure, like, right, this, I'm not sure what benefit this gives us over calling control, other than it makes it more explicit here. The field state, we're calling the factory function from above. I'm not sure which is better. I need to think this through. There are benefits to both, because when I think about it, this is really boilerplate. And we're going to have to do this for we're going to have to do this for every custom control. I mean, we don't have to. That's the thing. You don't have to do this. But if I'm looking at this through like the lens of an architect, or like a senior developer, or somebody more senior, I'm going to argue for this. I'm going to argue for something like this to exist. What that means and what that is, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what that actually means or what that actually is. Probably take some more thought into it and some more experimentation. But the reason, like, if I look at this through like an architecture lens, the reason I want this is that it's explicit and it's easy for people to understand, right? We grab the control that's passed into our custom component. We then grab the field state from that control factory, right? So this control is actually, and we could even make this more explicit in the way we talk about it. because this is a control factory. And so now we're a little bit more explicit in what we're doing. The reason that this is a little bit bothersome to me is that this becomes boilerplate, but it's kind of self-inflicted boilerplate, if I want to call it that. And the reason I'm calling it self-inflicted is if I was in charge of a project, I would want people to do this. This isn't being forced by Angular in any, like, Angular is not saying, hey, you have to do this, right? What we're getting is it's going to be me, you know, as I'm looking across, you know, at my current job, there are a lot of developers, a lot of development teams. The more explicit and the easier it is to understand what things are doing, the easier it is to maintain consistency across all teams. So this would be boilerplate, but this would be boilerplate enforced by me. And, you know, I would probably have to write linting rules around this because it's something that I'm doing. It's not something that the Angular team is doing. I would do like they do in the doc. For now, I see settings form.username.errors. Yeah. See, I don't have access to the, I don't have access to the, form at this point, right? I'm just an input, but I see what you're saying, Ole, and that's a really good argument. So when we look at how errors are handled, so like if we take a look, I'm not using it because we're using auto errors and stuff, so we aren't having to actually bind errors. But what Ole is saying is in the documentation for signal forms, and if you want to provide a link, then I can show the link really quick, Ole. I don't think I've got that documentation up anywhere, but in the documentation, when you bind to a control, and I don't want that. What I want is that. So when you bind to a control, for example, here, right, we've got the form dot, oh no, I'm using it right here. This is exactly, I'm using the exact same thing. And thank you for that. Oh, I do have that one. I do have that one up. But if we take a look at this, notice that my control is bound to form.id, but when I'm binding the input error, I'm grabbing form.id, but then I'm calling the factory function. Oops, that was dumb. I'm calling the factory function here, and then I'm grabbing invalid signal off of that factory function, right? So for consistency's sake, I agree with you. This is what they're doing in the documentation. So we've got this and then this. That's a good call out, a really good call out. So here, what we should be doing is control that. And the reason for that is that is currently the preferred way of doing it. And that this is definitely, you know, I'm not going to say that this is the way it's going to be in the future. So I'm not going to comment on the decision made here. There are ways that we could make form.id, well, no matter what you do, there's going to be some ugliness. This is probably the best way to handle it. Because here you're not getting confusing between signals and stuff. Here there's a little bit of confusion because you have to call the factory function, right? We know that this is a factory function. So sorry about the cough, but we can see here we've got a form.id. It could be a little bit confusing, like why do I have to call it sometimes and not other times? And it really comes down to you have to call it sometimes because we want to get access to the field state. The field state is what has the errors, what has the invalid, what has disabled, right? The field state has a whole bunch of stuff on it. Do I have a disabled input? Do have a disabled input? I'm very curious if I can go control dot disabled here. Yes, I can. I don't need the disabled input. So there's my label, my placeholder, my control. So let's test that really quick. Let's just add we'll disable for right now. We'll disable these inputs. We're going to disable all inputs. Disabled equals, and here we're going to go form.done. So we're going to add this across everything. So boom, boom. So right away we can't do disabled. Because we aren't giving disabled. This is probably a good place to do that. Hey, we implements form UI control. So it doesn't like that. I mean, we can now add our disabled, right? I'm not a fan. We'll take it off the button right now. Our app input. It's fascinating that this works, but really it should be this. Shouldn't it? Actually, we don't even want to pull it from the form. We can pull it from the model.done. There we go. Let's go ahead and replace this. So there we go. Now, if we go back, it disables everything when it's done. It's just a simple way for us to check it being disabled. What I'm not sure about, and we can take this all off here. Is how do I bind this? Because I can obviously go I can take this out and I can bind to control dot disabled, and that's perfectly fine. Anything is great that is not control value accessor. I totally agree with you there, Ole. And here it doesn't like, because form UI control has all of this stuff, and right, we can't do extends because you can't extend an interface. But if we say that we implement it, so we've got no properties in common. So form UI control gives us a whole bunch of information, right? That we can add, and we I mean, it's just it doesn't really give us anything here. And what this is probably where something like Angular primitives would be useful, because Angular primitives is going to give us a directive that's going to give us all the disabled stuff here. In fact, let's see what happens if we add Angular primitives here. So if we add a host directive with ng input to our stuff, what happens, right? So here, if we add a host directives, and we just do ng input, ngp input here, boom. Do we get disabled for free? So we don't get disabled for free. See, it's adding the inputs here. So what they're, I don't even know what I was hitting to do that. What they're doing is they're saying, hey, here's our directive. And from that directive, we also want inputs. And the input we want is disabled. How are they doing it? So they've got this input type equals text with a placeholder. Then they're adding the directive, they're adding the disabled inputs. They don't have, okay, I see. So they don't have a template at all with theirs. But I think that's the way that it's going to have to happen, is when you add these host directives, you're going to have to basically add stuff to it, right? So you've got your inputs and your outputs. Standalone directives that should be applied to the host whenever the directive is matched. By default, none of the inputs or outputs. You can additionally alias inputs and outputs by putting a colon. Yeah, so I don't think that's going to work either. What I want to avoid is having to specify disabled. I can absolutely grab it from the control. And that works fine. But as soon as I try to do a disable here, like this will work just fine, right? And that's going to disable it, but it's always going to be disabled. As soon as I try to do this and bind it to my model.done, it doesn't like this because disabled doesn't exist. And we can even see when we go to the compile, it's going to tell us, hey, disabled doesn't exist. And this is the problem when you start trying to override, when you start trying to create custom components from Angular components. Hey, Stony Eagle, welcome to the stream, man. Thanks for saying hi. Oh man, like right after somebody shows up, I gotta ban somebody. Goodbye. So it just doesn't make sense for me to even buy viewers if I wanted to. Angular's never going to be a big enough streaming impact of buying viewers. Like some random person doesn't make any difference to my viewing. Feel free to call me just Stony. Like, hey, no problem, man. Welcome, that Stony. Good to have you here. But anyway, before I got distracted, this is the problem with creating custom inputs like this, is that you're in this constant dilemma of, if I want to add things like placeholder, I've got to basically add pass-through bindings. And so it becomes a little bit ugly. So usually what I would do in this case, and we could even do it here. But you use transclusion. So what you would do is this piece here, the field set, and then the errors are the piece that we care about. The rest we don't care about as much. And so this, content projection is what they're calling it now, right? The old Angular called it transclusion, content projection. So you would project this input into the field set, and then the field set would handle the errors and stuff like that. But in that case, you're still pushing the errors to the container. So you have the input itself, and then you would push the errors to the container. And there are trade-offs to both styles. You mod for 23 channels, and they can't type. Yeah. Let me hide this one for you. I'm good with that. I don't get very many of them. So let's see. Yeah, let's take that out of there. It works really well. I'll take a look at your README and see how it works. Thank you for that. Yeah, I've usually got a couple of mods here, but it looks like I've only got my YouTube mods here today. So, hey, speak of the devil, right as right as I say I don't have my Twitch mods here, Marcus shows up. What's up, Marcus? Welcome to the stream, man. So, yeah, totally agree. And we can work through that. I appreciate the help, and I'll take a look at that README. I definitely don't want to show it on stream. I took your message out just so it's not showing up in the chat too, since you didn't want it shown out there. But yeah, very much appreciate the offer, man. And I will take a look at that after the stream. But yeah, we're in this perpetual like weirdness with Angular. And when I say that, what I mean is, if I want disabled, doing this control.disabled doesn't help me. Instead, I can go here and I can bring in disabled as a model, and now disabled works. And I can bind to disabled. But this is the problem, because every time I do this, I'm really only providing a subset of everything that input can have on it. And anything I want to control through that subset is, much more difficult. And so it's it's a trade-off, right? And it really comes down to what you're trying to do as as an organization or as a group or things like that. You need to look at these trade-offs. I tend to go the route of, we put this stuff as content projection, so the input itself is projected, because I don't want to have to worry about all of the placeholder, the disabled, all of that stuff, right? I don't want to have to worry about duplicating that and passing it in. So I allow the input to be the part that's, I do content projection with that, but then we have to deal with like labels, right? So we'd still have the label binding, but the other binding that we would have is the errors binding. And maybe let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at a projected input versus what we've got now, because they're going to work the same way. So if we take a look right now, everything is working as expected. So we're getting our errors, everything's projecting properly. There are some benefits to this method, to not projecting it. For example, right now, I don't have to worry about binding the input error class. So if that's a big deal, and if people keep forgetting that, then the content projection may not be the way you want to go. We can get around this though. We can get around it with like some host bindings, or not host bindings, but like a directive. And a directive could grab the control, but then people have to remember to add the directive, right? And if I'm forcing people to add the directive, then maybe this is the same, but maybe not. Let's take a look at that. I'm actually, yeah, we've got about half hour or so to go. Let's take a look at what is the difference, and what can we do? Because there might be some reasons to do one or the other, and what are the trade-offs? Why would we pick one? So let's start there. So the first thing we want to do is let's add another control. So we're going to add a new, and this isn't a control, this is a component, because it doesn't actually, it's not going to actually be a form control. So here we're going to add our new component. We're going to use NX for it. And we want to generate a component. So there we go. And let's show all options, but we're going to call this we'll call it our projected input. We're not going to export it. It's definitely standalone. We want on push change detection. We're going to use, we'll turn this on because if I'm not using Tailwind, then we're going to use that anyway. Inline our styles, inline our template, no module. And everything else is okay. So let's go ahead and generate this component. So here's our projected input component. Let's go ahead and open that up. Actually, before we go here, let's go ahead and commit some stuff. So let's stage this, and we'll stage this, and we'll just say, hey, AI, write me a message. And then we'll stage all of these and say, hey, AI, write me a message. And boom, now we're in a good spot. So we've got our projected input and we've got our regular input. For now, let's go to our regular input and let's just grab this entire template. So here we go. We're going to paste this in here. So there's our everything pasted in. We are going to be removing a bunch of stuff, but the other thing we can do is take out these styles, and instead of that, we're going to do a host binding, and we're going to add, and it had it there, and then I lost it. So we're just going to say, yep, class block. So that's going to add block to our host. So there's our host binding. We don't need this. We are going to need the label, so we'll leave that there. We don't need the input. Instead, our input is going to be our content projection. So we're going to add our ng content here. And this can be self-closing. And then we also need to push in our errors. And we're going to need to bring in our Zod error also. So here we can import our Zod error pipe. So there we go. So we need our label and our errors. So our label, we can clean that up a bit too. So here we can just say label input required and errors input required. Actually, these aren't required. We can just grab them from here. So our label we can grab from here. And that's that one. And it doesn't need to be a model. It can be an input. And our errors, need to be of type. If we look at them, our errors need to be, come on, a validation error. So here, this becomes validation error. Boom. So there we go. That brings all of this in. And so now we're ready for a content projected. We're ready for a content projected input. This is all it really requires. But we can see the trade-offs here. Let's go replace the app input here. So boom, we're going to replace this with app projected input. And we're missing a couple of things. One of the things we need right away is the label. And that's going to be our task name. And then the other thing we need is errors. And we can grab that from our form.name.errors. So that should work. Why doesn't it like errors? Oh, we've got it set as read only. Why did we do that? That's a weird choice. Errors is not provided by any applicable directive on app projected input. Directive input errors validation error. It is. And the other thing we can do here is instead of requiring it, we can do that. Oh, did I not bring this in? So we can also bring in projected input. There we go. So that solves that issue. The last thing we have to do is now we have to bring in the input to project. And that's where we're going to basically grab all of this. And it goes inside of here. So there's that. And now here, the control is now form.name. And then here, this becomes form.name.invalid. Our placeholder is no longer the placeholder. Now we have to get our placeholder from here. And then disabled, placeholder no longer needs to be an input. And disabled can be based on, whatever, right? We can base it on model dot done. And so this is kind of the trade-off, because now for every input, we get more control over the input itself, but now we have to remember to add the input to it. We also have to probably control, width and stuff like that. So we have to remember the styling on the input. We could do the styling with either composite classes, so we could create our own classes that do this for us, or we could add a directive that does this for us. Again, to add the input error, we have to grab this. And so, it's kind of, it's the trade-offs, right? Half a dozen of one, half a dozen of the other. This is very easy to create, right? You create the control, the label, and the placeholder, and that's it. Here, we have to pass in, the control, the placeholder. We have to move the label here. We have to also pass the errors here. And so with this, you get more control over the input. And so if you find yourself wanting to control the inputs that are projected, this is the right choice. If you find yourself wanting to control consistency, this is the right choice. The trade-offs being that, you're having to add things in different places and requiring the users to remember a bunch of stuff like the input and then, the error input and things like that. And those can be easily forgotten. So, consistency may be a big deal. And that's, those are the trade-offs that we're making. The trade-off here is that anytime we want to add something to this input here, anytime we want to add something to this input, like disabled or, max width, min width, things like that, those all have to be added here. We can probably grab some of them from the control, but if we want to bind them here in this, when the control is used, then we're going to have to add them here. And so, right, those are the trade-offs. Those are the big trade-offs. And, there are various ways around it. But we can see that our form works. It's behaving as expected. This input behaves as expected. It behaves the same way as the other one that we didn't replace. But those are the trade-offs. In the past, before we got signal forms, in the past, I would have told you, do this every time. Do projected input every time. And the reason for that is that we had to do control value accessors. And it's so easy to get control value accessors wrong. And they're such a headache, and they can lead to so many issues that this was almost never a choice for me. I would write a custom control with a control value accessor only when absolutely necessary. But I was always very, very careful about how we did it and things like that. With the signal forms and the fact that we can just pass in controls, right? The fact that if we look at like the random number button, all we have to do is implement form value control. and then implement a model for the value. And Angular takes care of all of the rest for us. We don't have to worry about anything else. It becomes so ridiculously easy to create our own controls that really this becomes an interesting discussion. The discussion now is down to, do you want more control over the styling? Or do you want your users to have more control over the input styling and stuff like that at the cost of, them having to remember things, right? So the cost here is having to remember this, having to remember this. The rest of this is all useful. And if there are things that you want to bind to on the input, that you want very, very custom inputs, this is the right choice when you want to customize the inputs a lot. But the payoff or the trade-off is things like this. We can get around this trade-off using directives. So, we could add a directive that adds the this. So here, if we came here and we added a directive. Come on. There we go. So we'll grab that from Angular core. And this directive, we can just say, hey, export class, and we'll call this our, what do we want to call this? We'll call this our projected input styles. So there we go. And so now for our directive, we need a selector. So let's go ahead and add our selector. We're not going to add this post class block, but here what we want is we want our app projected input. So we're going to add this to our app projected input, but we're going to say, hey, default style. So on an app projected input, we can add a default style attribute. And here, instead of this, what we're going to add is we're going to go back to our to-do, and we can add our input and full width. And width full. Boom. What doesn't it like here? Expected a comma, that's fine. Oh, we don't have the closing one here. There we go. The selector should be camel case. Okay, fair enough. We can do that. Default style. It doesn't like that we're requiring an app projected input, so it's complaining about that. But that's okay. It wants me to start with app default style. So there we go. So now we've got this, and now we can take this out. We can say, hey, we want our app default style added to this. Boom. And so now when we go take a look, Oh, that didn't work. We need to also add that here. App. We need. Did I not export that? I did. Projected input styles. So projected input styles. Boom. It is used. Oh, it's not allowed. Ah, you're right. You're right. This needs to be, it can't be app projected input. It has to be input. And now it will work. And now it's not going to complain also about me not using it. But now we're using it properly. So we've got our default style. And now when we reset, we can see that it's working. And we're getting the feedback that we would expect. So, you know, in this case, where you want control over inputs, but you may also want, you know, more granular control over the inputs, but you also want broader control over general styles and things like that. You can add, you know, you can add directives, and using the directives, you can bind to the host. So this directive is applied to the input. As soon as it's added, it's going to add the input and the width full to the host itself. So this input is our host. And you know, we could do something similar with the input errors. So we could add a directive that accepts an input, and then we can add the input error binding to the classes based on the invalid. And so these are the trade-offs. Much more control here, much more granular control over the input, and we can overcome some of the stuff. The other benefit to using a directive like this is that now that directive, if we wanted to update this to have, you know, some other, you know, we could go, you know, color dash primary. And now everything that uses that is going to update. And probably color dash primary is probably not the right thing, but you can see that we added the color primary right here to our input through our directive. So, you know, when we're trying to decide, this is really text dash primary. And now when we take a look at it, we'll see that the text inside of here is now the primary, right? So we can update things by composing changes through directives, and so we can compositionally control the granularity. That's a lot of fun words, right? That makes me sound super important, saying that we're compositionally controlling the granularity. But the benefit here is that our app default style can only be applied to an input. When it's applied, it's going to add the appropriate directives to the input itself. The downside to this using directives is that in very, very heavy forms, you could have multiple directives being instantiated per input. which could lead to a high memory usage for your application. So you need to be careful about directives when you're using really, really large forms. Our form is pretty small, like very small, right? We've only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inputs. Now, if this form was repeated, say, 1,000 times, now we need to look at the directives. And these are the kind of trade-offs that you're looking at when you're working with code at scale. But for our purposes, it really comes down to, do we want granular control over the input? Then we go this route. Anything here that we want to make consistent, we can add our own what do we want to call it? Our own directives to it. The other thing that I kind of got distracted with as I was thinking through that is I was like, wait, can't we use Angular primitives here? Probably. So we could create our own input and then, add host directive of ng input to it. And then that's going to, allow us to do stuff like this where we get similar inputs. And you can see that using this is just input with app input and, our text holder, stuff like that. So we could take this a bit further. And this is a place to explore for next time. We're at the end of the stream for the day, but next time, let's take a look at using Angular primitives. Because what we could do is a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about could be encapsulated into an Angular primitive that has a selector like this. Hey, Michael, good to see you, and thank you for being here, man. I guess I did have another mod here when. Oh wait, you're another one of my YouTube mods. Never mind. But yeah, thank you for being here. We're kind of at the end of. I mean, these signal forms are so powerful, but they're also very simple. We're kind of at the end of what we can learn about signal forms after today, where we learned about how to pass using a field tree, how to pass an existing component into another component and projecting that component, right? So we're kind of at the end of that. We can explore some other stuff. One last thing I'm thinking about doing is like a star input that allows you to enter a number or select stars. I'm thinking about that, where we could pass in an existing control, but then also have another control that we use that binds the two together. I don't know. I'm thinking about doing something a little bit crazy like that. But I also want to take a look at like Angular primitives. And what does Angular primitives give us? Because I was, we're outside of signal forms if we're using Angular primitives. And this is the piece where I'm trying to think through. I don't know how Angular primitives are going to work with this. If I look at it, where Angular primitives are probably going to shine is like these classes, and then, some of the other stuff. But I don't really think that that's a big benefit, because we can get that stuff already, because we're going to be reusing this control anyway. So it's not like we're putting this everywhere. So I think where Angular primitives are really going to shine is in this case where we want to use projected components, and we're still using signal forms here, right? We're still binding to a control, but this app default style could become, it could become our input. We could make this a component input and output that. And that's what I want to take a look at. Anyways, thank you guys for being here. I will get this up on GitHub right after, and then I will post the link along with the replays. So thanks again. Wow, 75 viewers. Thank you everybody for being here. I guess I do need to mention, let's wrap it up with this. I was recently on the Angular Plus podcast, and I had a chance to talk with Jay, Brian, and Brooke. Amazing people. I have opportunities to interact with them outside of like the podcast and stuff. Very, very amazing people. Just incredible help in the community. And the number of people here, I'm really willing to bet comes down to that podcast. So I do want to give a big thank you to the Angular Plus podcast. It's something that I listen to on the train as I'm going into work. And it's something that I think brings value to the Angular community. If you guys are new here, thanks for hanging out. I'm going to stream every Sunday at the same time. I enjoy doing this kind of stuff. You guys will see that at my current job, I do a lot less coding. I do a lot more architecture and a lot more, a lot more document writing and stuff like that. That's related to more higher level stuff. This is where I get to spend my time coding and learning things and enjoying just, what I've loved for years is writing code. So come hang out, realize there's always going to be struggles. The community here is amazing. As you saw, Ole and Michael were a huge help today. And come hang out, come be a help. I thank you, Stony, for sharing that stuff. I'm going to take a look at that after the stream too. And you guys, have a great rest of your week. Looking forward to next Sunday's stream when we're going to dig in deeper, and we're going to look at ng primitives and how can we change this directive to support ng primitives. So, have a great week. We'll see you next time, and thank you all for being here.